Daddy shark, daddy shark, daddy shark.
熱く燃やせ最高最強のスーパースター
The year is 1981, and Denjiman was a runaway hit. Battle Fever J was a decent first foray into the Super Sentai franchise, but Denjiman had been a huge success. The question was, where do they go from here? If Toei went with their previous strategy of wiping everything clean and starting from scratch, they'd have a brand new series with the potential to fail. At first, they planned on extending Denjiman into a second season, but for various reasons, they couldn't just rehash and repackage Denjiman and expect it to work out. Then they put forward the idea of a sequel series named Plasma Man, which would have been Denjiman with new suits and equipment. However, the name Plasma Man had already been trademarked by another property, so it was back to the drawing board again. In the end, they tried a middle-of-the-road approach, making the next season a direct sequel to Denjiman, and plans were made for Denjiman crossovers and cameos. It would star a completely new cast of characters and team to fuel toy sales, while keeping the framework of what worked before. They were so sure of the premise that they started hyping it on magazine scans before the new Sentai even released. And that is what led to Taiyo Sentai, Sun Vulcan. The season begins with the evil organization Black Magma, sowing dissent between nations and causing disasters around the world, and now they've set their sights on disrupting the peace in Japan. To counter this threat, the Guardians of World Peace recruit 3 of their soldiers to become Sun Vulcan, a special task force to combat the forces of Black Magma. Ryusuke Owashi becomes Vol Eagle, Kinya Samejima is chosen to be Vol Shark, and Hyo Asao is drafted to be Vol Panther. Hyo is a former GWP Ranger and is the youngest member of the team, and the team's comedic relief. He is book dumb, fears dogs, and has odd verbal tics that make him akin to a cartoon character. He's the son of a rich Japanese landowner, and since joining Sun Vulcan was a top secret mission, his father believes he just up and abandoned his post, which causes friction between the two of them. Of the 3 Sun Vulcan members, he is the representative of the land as Vol Panther, despite clearly being represented by a cheetah during the roll call. Somewhere, a zoologist is crying their eyes out. Kinya is a naval officer and oceanographer, and he spent most of his young life with his family in the Sahara regions of Africa. His entire family was killed in a violent conflict between warring African tribes, which made him a serious-minded individual who joined Sun Vulcan to preserve peace. He's the representative of the sea as Vol Shark, and alongside Hyo, he pilots the Bull Vulcan, a bulldozer-like vehicle that forms the Sun Vulcan robo's legs and feet. Ryusuke Owashi is an Air Force officer who leads Sun Vulcan as Vol Eagle and represents the sky. He pilots the Cosmo Vulcan, which forms the head, upper body, and arms of the Sun Vulcan robo. Halfway through the series, he leaves the team to pursue his dream of working on space shuttles for NASA, and he's replaced by his fellow Air Force soldier and kendo master Takayuki Hiba. The Sun Vulcan team is led by their weapons designer and tactical expert Daisaburo Arashiyama, who acts as mission control and is their commanding officer. Daisaburo is the one who created their weapons and designed the Sun Vulcan robo, and is a brilliant strategist. He is supported by his daughter Misa and her dog CC, who she somehow taught to speak Japanese. The team operates out of a base disguised as a curry shop, and to keep their cover, they employ a bumbling cook named Sukehachi to put forth the appearance of an average family restaurant. Black Magma is a machine empire that set its sights on Japan to obtain the geothermal energy underneath that they need to power their army. They are led by Hell Satan, a machine overlord who wouldn't look out of place at a Darth Vader lookalike contest. Hell Satan still needs an ace in the hole against Sun Vulcan though, so he revives the recently defeated Queen Hedrian with a metal afro so she doesn't get ostracized by the other lady murder bots. Queen Hedrian is made a lieutenant in Hell Satan's army, and she assists him with her black magic and knowledge of Sentai teams. Eventually, they're joined by the space outlaw Amazon Killer, who swears allegiance to Queen Hedrian, and the two begin plotting to take over Black Magma. I could talk more at length about the characters and plot of the show, but ultimately I can sum up the show with 2 words: unfulfilled potential. The show squanders almost every opportunity given to it for telling a better story than its predecessor.
It was the joke heard around the world, the one by President Reagan.
When Sun Vulcan was airing, the world was already well underway into the Cold War. The threat of a nuclear exchange between the 2 premier world superpowers cast a shadow over the lives of everybody on the planet. Even children understood the looming crisis as their parents lived in fear of a potential nuclear war. Super Sentai had always been a series that was created to lift children's spirits, and Sun Vulcan was no different. As Sun Vulcan begins, a lot of emphasis is made on Black Magma utilizing the Dark Qs, which are androids made to look like humans, and designed for subterfuge and sabotage against human nations. This was likely an attempt to assuage children's fears about the heightened international tensions of the time. But before the show was even halfway over, they had dropped the Dark Q stories completely to focus on episodic stories about mongers, machine monsters created for ridiculous schemes such as making people really hungry. This is largely the reason for all of those out-of-context Sun Vulcan memes.
モンガいくら化けてももう騙されんぞえこの先はピョンタじゃないんだ嘘だかい
Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, most of the episode stories go like this, but even the more serious stories don't have any sort of meaningful conclusion. For example, one episode has Takayuki's friend seemingly betraying Sun Vulcan and selling them out to Black Magma. But then it's revealed that he's a triple agent spy who used that as a cover to assassinate Hell Satan. His reason for doing so was because of the resentment he felt from being second best to Takayuki all the time. At the end of the episode, it's proven that he's not a traitor, but the animosity between the 2 friends is never resolved in any satisfactory manner. Meanwhile, Hell Satan and Queen Hedrian just sit in their base at the North Pole and shake their fists at Sun Vulcan whenever they foil the villain's plans for the week, without pushing the plot forward in any meaningful way until the last few episodes. The villains do gain some minor victories, like blowing up Sun Vulcan's base halfway through the season, but all it really means is that the team moves to a newer, better base. The villains also suffer from some bloat because the writers just would not stop introducing new villains into the show. First, they introduced Amazon Killer to serve as Queen Hedrian's loyal retainer, to mirror Hedrian's subordinates from Denjiman, and to act as a foil to Hell Satan's henchwoman. But nothing really clicks until Inazuma Ginga shows up in the last few episodes. Inazuma Ginga is a very strong but very untrustworthy brute of a space outlaw who has come to Earth to conquer it. He throws his weight around the Machine Empire, and he sows dissent and attempts to usurp power for himself. His overbearing strength tests the villains' loyalties to each other. If that sounds familiar, it's because Inazuma Ginga is basically a carbon copy of the Demon King Banriki from Denjiman, and that's when I realized Sun Vulcan ended up becoming a hollow retread of Denjiman's story. Meanwhile, Sun Vulcan having only 3 members would in theory make for better character development, but that doesn't happen either! I honestly cannot tell you the difference between Ryusuke and Takayuki, other than their names and the fact that Takayuki uses a sword. Seriously, aside from those 2 things, there's nothing separating the 2 of them. Denjiman's team wasn't the most well-fleshed out team, but at least most of them had personality traits that extended beyond he's a strong soldier from the Air Force and has a strong sense of justice. You could argue that that's the difference between a civilian team, which is what Denjiman was, and a military team, which is what Sun Vulcan is. But even Battle Fever J, which was a largely military team, had some pretty well-defined characters, even if some of them were somewhat one-dimensional. Sentai isn't a stranger to mid-season Ranger changes, but Sun Vulcan is unique in that it's the only season that switches out the Red Ranger, who was normally the lead, halfway through the season. The fact that the 2 Red Rangers are virtually indistinguishable from each other is already pretty bad. But what makes it worse is that the showrunners already knew ahead of time when Vol Eagle's actor, Ryusuke Kawasaki, would be departing the show, but still chose to introduce a guest star in the same episode to replace him without much fanfare. But the worst thing about the team, and something that's still a point of contention among many fans today, is that there was a lack of a female ranger for Sun Vulcan. The closest that you could come is Misa and her 1 episode jaunt as White Rose Mask, but even in that episode, she ended up being plainly defeated and needing to be rescued. Now, I don't want to talk about peripheral demographics or representation or any of that, because none of that is actually relevant to how the lack of a female member affects team dynamics. The biggest problem is that not having a female team member to balance out the male characters makes the male characters flat and boring, especially since many of the female characters before were fashionable and lively compared to the relative rigidness and stoicism of the male characters. The female members weren't there just to be eye candy. Otherwise, Diane Martin would have been a really popular character. But rather, they portray strength in a very different way than the male characters do. Having a team of stoic male military characters makes the team one-dimensional in more than one way, and it really worked against Sun Vulcan. Making someone like Hill the comedic relief doesn't make much of a difference at the end of the day, because he still fits the mold of a stoic military man. But out of every problem with the show, out of every lost potential that the Sun Vulcan failed to capitalize on, the absolute worst element of Sun Vulcan's lost potential is ironically the one that's most forgivable. Remember that crossover between Denjiman and Sun Vulcan that was promised and featured in magazine scans? Well, that never happened. There's no official reason given, and my research on the internet turned up nothing concrete. But whether it was due to scheduling conflicts with the actors and actresses, or simply because of budgetary concerns, the promised crossover event never came to fruition. The closest we got was a brief mention of Denjiman early on in the season, and a 2-episode story arc about the last descendants of planet Denji. This left a huge hole in the plot because the entire reason Queen Hadrian was in Sun Vulcan at all was to set up the crossover where the Denjiman team would ostensibly manage to defeat her once and for all. So because the crossover never happened, Hadrian's presence is more of a distraction than anything else, because she takes attention away from the other villains who should have been the main focus of the season. Instead, we get Demon King Banriki II, Inazuma Gingalu, and most of the villains are defeated or killed off in an anticlimactic or unceremonious fashion.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.
Ultimately, it's revealed that Hell Satan, the badass Darth Vader-looking machine overlord, was taking orders from a brain in a jar, and Daisoburo blows it up in one hit. If it sounds like I'm being overly negative, it's because Sun Vulcan adheres very strongly to many Sentai conventions from previous seasons, but wastes the storytelling cues left for it from Denjiman. It has a few callbacks to previous Sentai seasons, but it doesn't really capitalize on its potential in ways that truly matter. That being said, Sun Vulcan does have a lot going for it. The music is excellent, and it has a really good opening theme. In fact, it's probably one of my favorites from the Showa era of Super Sentai. The set design is amazing. The monsters all look good and are quite unique. Inazuma Ginga definitely looks far better than Demon King Banriki ever did. The Sun Vulcan suit designs are also excellent. The bodysuit is nothing too complicated, with a simple V design on the chest and a Sun Vulcan medallion. But that works to its favor. Sometimes less is more. The helmets are well designed and incredibly detailed, and each member has a unique animal motif for their helmet. But the scarves that each teammate wears really brings the costume together. Capes are rare in Super Sentai, and scarves are even more so. So it's a bit disappointing that this unique design aesthetic isn't used more often. The show also shows us the circuitry under the Sun Vulcan suits, so it's clear that the suits in Sentai are more akin to power armor than spandex bodysuits, which is a good bit of world building. I can probably say that Sun Vulcan has my favorite costume designs of the early season Super Sentai installments, except for maybe Mask Man, but we'll get to that eventually. Their equipment is also really distinctive. The Vulcan sticks and Vulcan ball provide variety for their weaponry, as well as a good mix of new and old, and the effects are much improved from the previous season. This season's design philosophy also made many contributions to the Sentai formula. It's the first season where the team uses wrist braces as their changers, and it would become the standard for the Showa era seasons moving forward. The brace changers themselves are detailed and very well designed, and to my knowledge, there's never been a toy or replica made of them, which is a shame, considering how good they look. In later seasons, some fans would consider wrist bracers a lazy design choice, so it's easy to forget how much of an improvement these changers were from previous seasons. Sun Vulcan was also the first season to introduce a multi-part combining mecha for Sentai, and the first year the mecha toy outsold everything else related to the season, which establishes it as the de facto main selling point of Super Sentai. It really isn't hard to see why. The Sun Vulcan Robo and its carrier, the Jaguar Vulcan, were excellently designed, and are a large part as to why the special effects of the season were so good. So ultimately, Sun Vulcan may not have told the best story, but it made great strides in improving the visual design aesthetics of the Super Sentai series. Overall, it may not have been the best season, but it was also far from the worst. It did waste a large amount of its potential story-wise, but it also established many of the Super Sentai mainstays, and was impressive in its own right in terms of set production and design. In fact, it was so impressive that the late Stan Lee wanted to adapt it as original programming on HBO, a plan that didn't really come together for various reasons. It was clear that making direct sequels to each season wasn't working out though, since planning and logistics seemed to be a nightmare to manage in the wake of the botched crossover. So Toei decided to simplify things for the next season. Join me next time and we'll take a look at Taiyo Sentai, Goggle 5. If you like what you saw in this video, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. Not to mention the bell notification so that you'll know whenever I make an update. I mean, you reached the end of the video, so I'm sure you saw something that you liked. As always, the Super Sentai overview is a passion project, so I appreciate any and all support that I get. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you next time. Abayo!